Right. Good afternoon and welcome to today's New York State Museum public program, Attica is Every Prison. My name is Aaron Noble. I'm the Senior Historian for Governmental, Political, and Military History here at the State Museum in Albany and curator of the Attica Uprising collections and the museum's Open Wounds exhibition about the uprising, which is open through the end of the year here at the New York State Museum in Albany and at the Rochester Public Library in downtown Rochester, New York. September 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of the Attica Prison Uprising. The uprising, which left 43 people dead and hundreds wounded, played out against the backdrop of the racially charged 1960s and early 1970s. The Attica Correctional Facility, located in Wyoming County in Western New York, opened in 1931 and was originally intended to house incarcerated men from upstate New York. However, by the 1960s, Attica became the overflow facility for New York City area offenders, which led to racial tensions between predominantly Black prison population and white guards. This racial disparity, coupled with the overcrowding and inhumane conditions, resulted in a tinderbox of tension by the summer of 1971. In just a few moments, we will be previewing an early cut of filmmaker David Kuhn's documentary project created in conjunction with the Correctional Association of New York. The Correctional Association was created in 1844 and has, for more than 175 years, been the only independent organization in New York State with authority under state law to monitor prisons and report its findings to the state legislature and the public at large. Attica is often presented as the culmination of the prisoners' rights movement, which itself built upon the civil rights activism of the 1960s. Rather, the Attica Uprising marks the beginning of the story of this nation's story of mass incarceration. Here in New York State, the implementation of the Rockefeller drug laws in 1973 dramatically changed sentencing for drug infractions, contributed to the dramatic increase in state prison populations, and fueled racial disparities that continue to plague the criminal justice system today. A report issued by the Sentencing Project earlier this month shows that Blacks are still incarcerated in New York State at a rate of nearly 8-to-1 and Latinx at 3-to-1 compared to incarceration rates for white New Yorkers. Attica is Every Prison details how the issues that resulted in the uprising at Attica in 1971 remain relevant to the dialogue over issues of mass incarceration today. Following the film, we will hold a brief question and answer session. During the film, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom app. The New York State Museum, in addition, is an approved CTLE sponsor. This program is being recorded and will be available to the public and to educators on the New York State Museum's website. For New York State teachers interested in receiving CTLE professional development credit, please fill out the survey and questionnaire that will be provided in the chat box at the end of this program. Thank you and enjoy the film.
I don't care what the hell the papers or anybody else says. I don't care what they say. I think that you had to do it that way, because if you would have granted amnesty in this case, it would have meant that you would have had prisons in an uproar all over this country. That's right. And you did the right thing. It's a tragedy that these poor fellows are shot, but I just want you to know that's my view, and I've told the troops around here to back that right to the hilt.
For most of us, prison is a pillar of our existence. You know, it was here before we got here, and you know, it's just a given. These facilities are closed institutions and they're in remote locations. And by design or by practice, they are, at least from the outside, you know, they're secretive. So it's hard for the public to sort of see what's going on and know what's going on. The public is largely clueless about the social consequences of our evolution to mass incarceration. I mean, in a crude way, as a society, we've just made the choice, right? I don't think we see it this way, but we've taken people and we've thrown them away.
Unfortunately, I was involved in the criminal justice system at a very young age. I got arrested in 1968, and my mother was in court to see her firstborn child, her only son, get sentenced to 25 to life. And we was going to one of the most hardest prisons in New York State, Attica Prison.
Attica, Clinton, Comstock. These are facilities in the northern and western New York hemisphere that's notorious for violence. Unfortunately, they're in rural areas where the population is 99.9% white.
Attica's in Wyoming County. We have more cows than people in Wyoming County. Think about that for a minute.
The guard, he has no real interaction with people outside of their race. The only time they see Black or Latino people is either on TV or in their custody. So if that's the basis of my relationship with you and I still see you as a thing, as an other, I'm gonna treat you that way. More so because I got a big wall put up and no one can see it. It's not for people to get out, to keep you in, because they got a lot of gates, they got a lot of locks to keep you in. That wall's for no one to look in to see what's going on. If no one can see what's going on, I can treat you like an other, I can treat you worse. Guess what? Who's to stop me? ADB 1598, step out yourself. You know, like, that's purposely done. And after that, it's done so many years, you know, two things that happen. Either someone be beaten down and they become acceptable to that type of behavior, treatment, or someone become real rebellious and will fight for their dignity and respect.
In the 70s, the political environment of the community and the civil rights movement and the Panthers and Malcolm X and all of those conversations and the assassinations of them were kind of becoming part of what people in prison knew about and were thinking about.
Hell no, we won't go. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. It was okay to say that my ancestors came to America from Africa on slave ships. And it's something to be proud of, to say that you survived or your foreparents survived the Middle Passage. These are the things that I started studying and started understanding. And at the same token, started creating an antagonistic attitude in me for them that was holding me in prison.
There's natural friction because they locked them in their cells at 4:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon after the last meal of the day. And most of us don't eat supper at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But in those days, that wasn't a priority. You got the numerous complaints about health care, very, very little religious freedom, a lot of pork in the diet.
Why can't we write to our mothers in Spanish? Why do we have to line up in size place? Why do we have to be silent? There are indignities that people were beginning to think they didn't have to take.
My dad was a prison guard from 1946 to 1979. 71, he went on a wall. And he used to say, it was like rats in a coal mine. When you see all the old timers heading out to the wall, it's like, you know, there's trouble brewing.
I heard the siren go off. Doop, doop. And I seen guys from other areas of the prison who I've never seen before crashing down the door in the metal shop, and we had a riot on our hands. What we gonna do now? We start hosting a list of demands now to the powers that be.
The demands, they were very specific. We are not beasts and we will not be driven as such. And the state actually agreed to most of them. And then, rather than relying on tear gas or the inevitability of the men running out of food and water, which would have brought it to an end, they decided to bring sharpshooters from the state police, and they essentially had a turkey shoot.
I was shot 3 times. I seen the ground dancing around me behind all the bullets.
By taking and putting down a gas attack from helicopters, and then having sharpshooters on the walls, we were able to pick off either from the wall or as our men went in, the men who had the knives at the throat of the hostages, and they did a fabulous job.
As told to me by Attica brother Jomo, who was later my husband, his father, and my children, there were people that were killed, there were people that were tortured, and there were people who were simply terrorized. They basically bled to death.
What prolonged the rebellion in that yard for 4 days was that everybody understood we had one common interest, was to survive that and get what we could get out to express the inhumanity that was being perpetrated towards us.
Look at their 28 demands that they made. Take out 2 of which that weren't going to be possible: the total amnesty for any crimes committed and transportation to a non-imperialistic country. Even Oswald, who was the commissioner at the time, he knew that there was stuff we had to let them. We have to have evening programs. We have to have better health care. We got to expand the religious opportunities. And if you think about it, within probably 5 years of all that had been done.
Hundreds of men, all of whom had been thrown away by society to be in this place, who were of different ages, different races, different political understanding and background, that they were able to organize themselves in that period of time to get everyone fed and clean and agreed and not harm any hostages. That's like extraordinary. Once the state went in and massacred people, understandably, that's what is the most remembered, is and that was the lesson, right? Don't you dare.
The thing that makes museum collections so valuable is that they create these touchstones to the events of the past. Most of us don't have the opportunity to be witness to these historic events, but these objects do. What made the Attica collection unique is that it sat around for decades, really kind of forgotten. This is a half of a pair of scissors, probably from the tailor shop at the prison. The material ranges from everyday mess utensils, keys, and door cranks to makeshift weaponry assembled by the prisoners during the uprising.
They were putting the pressure yesterday on me all day to go up there. Because everything else had failed. And did you go? Of course not. I wasn't coached up.
The story of the Attica collection here at the State Museum is really challenging because it tells the story that the state police were creating and crafting to incriminate the men incarcerated at Attica in any potential crime. More than 2,000 rounds of ammunition are fired, 10 hostages and 29 prisoners are killed by gunfire, dozens of others are wounded by state police gunfire, yet the state police evidence collection doesn't contain any of the ballistic evidence. What's tragic is we don't talk about these histories, prisoners and the men incarcerated at Attica and incarcerated across the state were never considered as part of the broader historical narrative. We here at the State Museum are really making a conscious effort to start making strides to try and address some of those less represented and too often forgotten voices.
That uprising and brutal state response left scars, visible scars.
What made that event meaningful over time is that it was the first time that people really saw inside what was going inside prison. It wasn't part of the civil rights movement conversations. It wasn't part of Vietnam. It wasn't part of any of that. The idea of progress in this country suddenly had to include those folks. mostly people say, well, you know, it really didn't change anything. The reality is that it brought college education into New York State prisons before almost any other state. It opened up contact visiting 7 days a week. I mean, my first legal job post Attica was the opening of the Albany office of Prisoners Legal Services. Like, that happened because of Attica.
After the Attica riot, one of the reforms proposed by the governor was to take the Commission of Corrections, which is a state agency oversight, to take it out of the Corrections Department to make it an independent agency. The Correctional Association existed since the mid-1800s. Most things we consider essential parts of criminal justice, you know, many of those things were at the time that they were instituted were sort of revolutionary ideas, you know, going back to the elimination of corporal punishment, the idea of separating minors from adults. Without outside oversight, we would still be doing what we consider today to be, you know, fairly barbaric things. Recently, the legislature has amended the law, re-expanding the Correctional Association's authority to enter and inspect prisons.
Well, outside oversight is like we're getting a lot of attention now on the police board, the policing's on the outside, the community-based stuff. I think there's always a place for it. 8 years I was a superintendent. I never once I got called down to Albany for various reasons, but it was never to sit down and have a conversation about how's your place going on, what's going on, what do you need, what do you wish for, what, you know, how's your staff, how's your evaluating your workforce and stuff. Is there anything we're doing that could be done differently?
We got a prison in every state in the United States, but there's only 3 oversights in the whole United States: Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. So we got some prisons, states got maybe 5, 10 prisons, and they don't have no oversight.
As Dean McKay said, Attica is every prison and every prison is Attica. And in other words, it could have happened anywhere. It just happened to happen here.
When I came to prison in 1968, there was 11,000 people in New York State prison, 11,000. In the 29 years that I did in prison, I seen the population balloon up to 80,000 people. Why? Why? We took 2 steps forward to take 3 steps backwards.
I think those of us who grew up in Attica times probably are sad that we would have expected to see more. We would have hoped that more people would see that the racism that underlies the criminal justice system, that we would have gotten farther. Attica, I do think, made a difference in the day-to-day lives of a lot of people who were locked up. It doesn't change the equation of how this works.
When you go to a state facility and you see in person cage after cage after cage after cage after cage after cage of, you know, young Black men, it's hard to walk away from that and not think that, you know, something has gone seriously wrong. What makes sense? Why are we doing this? What's the end goal? You know, what problem are we solving by putting a man in a cage?
Prison rehabilitation don't start in prison. Prison rehabilitation starts in the community that people come out of. That's where it starts at. When we start talking about equal education opportunities, when we start talking about equal employment opportunity, when we try to get away from the disparities of what happened in this country in particular, and started treating people on an equal basis, then we could talk about the prison system. I would like to see the state take a gamble on certain people and make it happen.
All right. With that, we can take any questions that the audience may have. The question is, when will the full documentary be available? Correctional Association and David Kuhn are continuing to work on expanding the documentary with the hope of making it a full-length documentary that would be appropriate for PBS or something similar. And they will be working on that, and they've released a 30-minute version through the Correctional Association website. That's correctionalassociation.org. That can be viewed through the CANY website. Another question, is there any oral history component to the New York State Museum collection? We are in the process of working on it. We have the Attica collection, and the process by which we were creating the exhibit has been severely hampered by the COVID pandemic. Many of our outreach efforts were limited in the last 2 years. We do plan to continue working with survivors and organizations such as the Forgotten Victims of Attica, which is comprised of the families and survivors from among the hostages in the prison. And we will be developing oral histories in conjunction with that, and also several of our partner organizations are also conducting oral histories, which will create a broader library for research and other interested individuals looking to learn more about Attica. The site is correctionalassociation.org, correctionalassociation.org. I will say that both this documentary, the museum's exhibits, but also just the collections in general, are really an important collection. It's an important story. It's very too often that we commemorate the things that we choose to remember, the things that we want to remember. But it also is important to acknowledge and face things that have happened in the past that are not so pleasant. What surprised me the most working on this documentary, there were a lot of things that were surprising. A lot of the work that Correctional Association does involves correspondence with men and women who are currently incarcerated in New York State prisons. Having done a lot of research on the uprising in 1971 and understanding the conditions in the prisons and the demands and grievances that the men incarcerated at Attica were making, to read some of these correspondence now 50 years later and kind of come to this kind of realization that if you remove the dates, oftentimes you couldn't tell which year some of these complaints were made. So I think that the fact that so little has changed, while things have gotten better in some regards, the fact that there is still such a long way to go, I think was something that was very surprising to me personally. What are the long-term plans for the Attica artifacts associated with Attica and the archival resources? Like all collections, the museum will house and preserve the Attica, the three-dimensional objects. There are a number of documents that came in 2010 with the Attica collection that are part of the New York State Archives collection and will be available through the New York State Archives. Much of the documentary history of the Attica Uprising unfortunately remains closed to research and to the public because of a number of New York State laws, because a lot of the information was grand jury testimony. So it remains sealed indefinitely. I do know that there are groups working in the state legislature and advocating for legislation that would allow for more of the Attica story and the Attica documents to be released for public view. Yeah, so the teacher survey has been posted online for any of our state teacher or New York State teachers looking for CTLE credit. Another question, has there been any reaction from the New York State Police, past or present, on the documentary or the exhibit? Not that I am aware of. The state police story has been told and erred fairly significantly and substantially since 2015 with Heather Ann Thompson's Pulitzer Prize winning book Blood in the Water and the republication of Malcolm Bell's The Attica Turkey Shoot. Both those books very much go into detail regarding the role of the New York State Police in the Attica Uprising. So there's nothing in the exhibit that was fresh information. We weren't treading new ground. So I have not heard or seen any reaction from the state police. Other research or work that needs to be done on this, as the Correctional Association of New York and other groups, Osborne Association, are showing, much of the work that needs to be done is in educating the public on conditions at Attica and creating an awareness of the fact that prisons are a part of New York State history, not only a part of the state government history, but part of our history as citizens of the state of New York, and creating that awareness in order to have a more informed, honest conversation amongst all of us about what prisons do and what their purpose is, and how they should be used moving forward. All right, again, the link to the CTLE teacher survey is now in our chat, in the chat and the Q&A box for anyone interested. Thank you all for participating, and I hope that if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at the New York State Museum, and we hope you'll have a chance to come down here to downtown Albany or to Rochester and view the Open Wounds exhibit, and hopefully learn a little bit more about the Attica Uprising. So everyone have a nice afternoon.